Okay? So the point, argument number one, or let's call it option number one, would be to respect the autonomy of the community. But that's not the perspective that the economics profession has chosen largely over the last 100 years. The alternative perspective that the economics profession has chosen is the paternalist position. And it's the idea that the economist knows best. And if the economist knows best, it's not only his or her right, but it's also their obligation to make the decisions that the economist thinks are in the best interests of the community, even if the community opposes the initiatives that the economist chooses. The idea here, from the economist's perspective, is the community can't possibly understand the ins and outs, the complexities of economic policy, so we will choose for the community the policy that they would choose and they should choose if they understood the matter as well as we do. All right, let me give you an example. Jeffrey Sachs, the famous development economist, who, if you study development economics, he's probably one of the most influential development economists of the last several decades. And we look at Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs has now, I think, advised something like 130 countries around the world. He's constantly flying around doing this. He was central to the transition in the post-Soviet Union era in Poland, Russia, and the other socialist states right after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, 1992. And he was brought in by these governments to be an economic advisor. Now, he had a choice. He could respect the autonomy of these communities and help them make their own decisions. But the perspective he took was quite different. He argued constantly to the reformers for the need for speed. He said, look, we can't do this slowly. This is the right agenda. He told them what the right agenda was, which was to liberalize their economy really fast, and we didn't need to do it really fast. And the reason we need to do it really fast is because people are going to be hurt by this transformation. A lot of people are going to get hurt a lot. And if we go slowly, those people are going to organize politically, and they're going to do what they can to stop the reform process, which we, meaning him, knew to be best. And so he constantly spoke of the need for speed. He urged legislators to push through the free market reforms as quickly as they could. Here's a couple of quotes from Jeffrey Sachs. He said, the reforms that he proposes, he said, quote, will eventually produce great benefits, but they will be opposed by many in the shrinking sectors. Populist politicians will try to hook up with coalitions of workers, managers, and bureaucrats in hard-hit sectors to slow or reverse the adjustment. So it is crucial to establish the principles of free trade, currency convertibility, and free entry to businesses very early in the reform process, end quote. He goes on to say, before they have time to mobilize to defend themselves. He says more directly, he said to the Polish legislature, figure out how much, this is a quote, figure out how much society can take and then move 3 times quicker than that, end quote. Now, I'm not criticizing Jeffrey Sachs for having proposed the wrong kinds of policies. And indeed, I'm not even criticizing Jeffrey Sachs, though something I enjoy. What I wanted to do here is point out to you the ethic that's driving his decision-making. The ethic that's driving his decision-making isn't, hey, let's help these communities understand the free market economy and the risks and talk with them about the 15 different ways we can manage a slow and gradual adjustment to the free market economy so as to minimize harm. Let's help them in that. No, the view is this. I, as a development economist, we as development economists, we know best. And our job is to do what we can to get this community to adopt these policies before they have time to figure out how much some people are going to get hurt, because in the long run, it's in their best interest. It's a thoroughly paternalistic approach that exploits expertise rather than tries to bridge expertise with the community to help the community be economically literate so they can decide for themselves. Here's a related dilemma that speaks to the same issue of paternalism versus autonomy of the community. Should economists lie? Ever? Should economists ever lie? How often should economists lie? In what context should economists lie? Now, you might think that a professional should never lie, that part of being if you're going to lie, if you're going to do all this economic analysis and then lie, what was the point of doing all the economic analysis? It defeats the whole point if your job is to generate models and data and information and then lie about it. So you might say, no, economists shouldn't lie, because if they lie, they're denying the autonomy of the community to choose for itself. The economics profession has taken a different view. The economics profession has tended toward the view that, yes, economists could lie. Moreover, economists should lie. When should economists lie? They should lie whenever it can be shown that by lying, they can get the community to adopt the policies that the profession thinks is best for the community, full stop. This issue of lying is an important one in economics, and yet it never gets discussed. Part of the reason is because of the issue of what's called policy credibility. The idea is very simple. Sometimes policies will work better if people believe that the policies will work. Policies that are credible will work. And the idea is simple. If people don't believe in a policy, let's say the Federal Reserve says, we're going to try and keep the inflation rate below 2%. If nobody believes that, then manufacturers are going to continually try to jack up their prices above 2%. Workers, when they go to negotiate their wages, are going to demand more than 2%. If the policy is not believed, people will undertake strategies that defeat the policy. If, on the other hand, people believe the policy, they will often act in such a way as to make the policy more credible. So, from the economist's perspective, it's perfectly appropriate to lie if lying is necessary to enhance the credibility of a policy that the economist knows is in the best interest of the community. Okay? I'll give you a specific example. 2008, the financial markets in the summer of 2008 start to crack. Suddenly, and in the fall. Suddenly we have what looks like it's going to be a full-blown financial crisis, which in fact is exactly what we got. Ultimately, the whole world was affected by the crisis that begins, let's say, in 2008. At the time, the Federal Reserve Chair was Ben Bernanke. And what did Ben Bernanke have to do? He had to constantly go from the Federal Reserve over to the Capitol and give testimony before Congress about what was happening in the economy. And what did Ben Bernanke do? He lied over and over. How did he lie? They brought him there and said, Mr. Bernanke, sir, is this economy going to be okay? And Ben Bernanke said, yes, the economy is going to be okay. Ben Bernanke, can you tell us, does the Federal Reserve have this under control? Yes, the Federal Reserve has this under control. If you know macroeconomics and you know the situation he was in, you have to know that all of this was his best attempt to persuade Congress and all the people like us watching television that the sky was not about to fall. He had to try to persuade us that the economy was good. Everything was good. It's under control. I understand. I know what I'm doing. The Fed is capable of managing this crisis. And the reason he needed to persuade us of this is because he wanted us not to pull our money out of the stock market and put it in our mattresses. He wanted firms not to start laying off people. He wanted firms to continue investing. He wanted firms to continue hiring, because if they didn't do that, we would have been looking at the next Great Depression, which thankfully we were able to avert. So he lied. He lied over and over and over, and he was good at it, and to some degree, to a large degree, he was successful. Question, would we have preferred that he tell the truth? Would you have preferred he went to Congress and said, I have no freaking idea what's happening. If I were you, I would take your money out of the banks, put it in a mattress, because really, I have no idea where the Dow is going to open tomorrow, and I have no idea what banks are going to. That was the truth. Do we want Ben Bernanke telling the truth? Okay, I think most economists would say, no, we don't want Ben Bernanke telling the truth. We want him lying when lying seems to promote the public good. But now this raises a difficult problem for the economics profession, a slippery slope. If lying is okay sometimes, when is it not okay? Can economists always lie? Who should decide? Who should watch over them to make sure that the lying they tell really is for the public good and not for their own good? And to what degree should we permit a profession to go on and on and on doing its work in part by lying? And what kind of lies should we permit? Ben Bernanke was clearly lying. He was exaggerating to the nth degree, his degree of understanding and confidence in the economy. What if, on the other hand, he had been manipulating data, falsifying reports? Would we have thought that that was okay? I think most economists would say no. No, when it comes to generating data, you shall not cross that line. We need to know what the real data is. So you can lie in this way, but you can't lie in these other ways. But then that begs raises a difficult question. When is lying appropriate, and when is lying not appropriate in a profession where lying is so important? I am here to tell you that in the last 150 years, the economics profession has never had that conversation, essentially trusting each individual economist to decide for him or herself when is it okay to lie, what's a virtuous lie, what's not a virtuous lie, and to police themselves. I think the stakes are too high for that. I don't think we can permit that. I think economics has to have a serious conversation about lying and when it's okay. All right, so now we're going to move much more quickly because, in fact, I'm almost out. I want to get you out of here soon. There are three more steps in the case for professional economic ethics. The first one was that economists enjoy influence over others by virtue of their intellectual monopoly. This one is equally important, but I'm going to say almost nothing about it. It's this, that in addition to intellectual monopoly, which gives economists power, today they also enjoy tremendous institutional power. Independent central banks, the World Bank, the IMF. You look at the institutions that economists lead, and what you find is that when you take them all together, these institutions have enormous power over all of our lives. So economists are able to amplify the power that they would already have by virtue of their intellectual monopoly, by virtue of the institutional positions that they now hold. This isn't a criticism of the economics profession at all. I think that they do a lot of good work in these institutions. The point is this: they have extraordinary degree of power. That implies that they have ethical duties and obligations. We should have a serious conversation about that. What are those obligations? And by the way, just last point, if you think the power of economists in the developed world, like in the United States and the developed industrialized countries is large, which I do, it is much, much greater in the global South. When you look at the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of economists were essentially in the position of social engineers, able to redesign economic institutions wall to wall. Extraordinary influence in the economics profession. The third premise, see, I'm going to move quicker here. Third premise is really important. Economic policy bears on different people differently. We teach this in Econ 1. Every Econ 101 teacher teaches this at some point or another. For example, the minimum wage. Is the minimum wage a good thing or a bad thing? In your Econ 101 or a labor economics course, you'll be told that minimum wage benefits some people. So for sure, but it harms some people. So if you've got a high minimum wage and then you take it away, you liberalize the labor market, some people are going to be harmed, but other people are going to be hurt. So getting rid of the minimum wage. Same with rent control. Same with free trade. You get rid of tariff barriers that protect economies. Some people are going to be harmed, other people are going to be helped. Virtually every economic policy that you can come up with helps some people and harms other people. Uneven impact. But then that raises a difficult question. Is it okay to advocate a policy that you know is going to benefit some people, but only at the same time by harming other people? Is that okay? When is it okay? How should we decide which cases it's okay to hurt some people to benefit others, and in which cases it's not okay? Economists tend to rely on what a philosopher calls moral geometry, which is to say they rely on mathematical tests to answer ethical questions, the chief one being the Kaldor-Hicks compensation test. It's a very simple test. It says, a policy is good if the winners gain more than the losers lose. If the winners gain more than the losers lose, it's a good policy. Or we say it more formally, if the winners can fully compensate the losers and still enjoy net benefit, then it's a good policy. But to say it more simply, if the gains are bigger than the losses, the gains to some are bigger than the losses to others, it's a good policy. My question when I think about this is that really an adequate test to decide when it's okay to hurt people? Well, maybe we can learn from medical ethics. Let's look at the field of public health, and I'm going to give you two cases. Let's look at two cases from public health, because in public health, they also confront the same problem. Sometimes in public health, helping some people means you have to hurt other people. Here's an example. Quarantines. You know, the Ebola pandemic that's just hit West Africa, just devastated parts of West Africa. In order to respond to the epidemic, what public health officials did, and what they always do, is they isolated some people who had been exposed to the pathogen but were not yet showing symptoms. They sequestered them, they quarantined them so as to prevent the virus from spreading to other people, okay? Were some people helped? Absolutely. The people who didn't get sick by virtue of the fact that they were protected. Were some people harmed? Yes. Being quarantined raises your chances that you're going to get the virus. It violates your rights to free mobility, so you could flee from the area. And lastly, it increases the chances that you're going to die. But is it okay? Is it okay in a crisis situation like a pandemic to harm some people through quarantine in order to help others? I think most economists would say yes. I think most people in this room would say, yeah, that's appropriate. But what about this case? What about harvesting organs? What about, you all look like healthy people. What about snatching, what if public health officials snatched you off the street, brought you into a hospital against your will, took out a kidney and put you back on the, patched you up, got you healthy and sent you down the road in order to save the life of somebody else? Is that okay? There are winners and there are losers. Just like the test before, it may very well pass the Caldor-Hicks compensation test. The gainers gain more than the losers lose here, because all you've lost is a kidney, but the person whose life you've saved has now got a life that's been saved. It passes the Caldor-Hicks test. Is it okay too? I'm guessing most of us would say, no, wait. There's a difference here. There's something, I don't know exactly what it is, but there's a difference between quarantining during a pandemic and snatching people's organs in order to save other people's lives. And it's that moment of hesitation when we compare these two cases side by side, it's that moment of hesitation where we really think about it that gives us hope for ethical medical practice. The problem is, in economics, we don't hesitate to think. We have our Caldor-Hicks compensation test, we've got our moral geometry, and right now, across this country, I guarantee you, there's an economist teaching Econ 101, and he's got the supply and the demand curves and all the rest, and is showing his students or her students that it's good to get rid of the minimum wage for all kinds of reasons, on the grounds that but mostly because the winners will gain more than the losers will lose. My argument is, you know what? A profession that causes as much harm as the economics profession causes, it had better do better than moral geometry. We need to have a more serious conversation about when it's okay to harm some for the benefit of others. The last point, the fourth step in the argument as to why we need professional economic ethics. Economists operate in a world of ignorance. The degree of ignorance in economics is much higher than in other professions. I call it epistemic insufficiency. Economists don't know now and never will know enough to really be able to predict what's going to be the effect of any particular policy on the targeted community in the future. There are just, economies are too complicated. There are too many variables. So we may guess, we may have good reasons to believe that a policy is going to have certain effects, but here's what we don't know. We never really know whether a policy is going to succeed. We never know if it doesn't succeed, how exactly it's going to fail. We never know if it does fail, who exactly is going to be harmed in advance. And we never know in advance of those who are going to get harmed, which of the harms are compensable or reversible, which people can be saved from the harm, and which of these harms are irreversible, such as through mortality, through death. None of that can an economist know in advance. Now, other professions have to struggle with ignorance too. Engineering, medicine, economics. Take a look. Engineering. You drive home tonight. A lot of you are going to walk home, you're going to go over a bridge. Are you going to get out of your car and you're going to go inspect the bridge? You're going to kick the bridge to make sure it's okay? Are you going to call up an engineer and say, hey, I'm at the Main Street Bridge. Should I cross it? And if he says yes, you're not going to pick up the phone and get a second opinion. Why? You're just going to go over that bridge as if it's not there. Because the level of basic economic knowledge is adequate to the task of building bridges. We don't need to get second opinions before we cross bridges. So economic knowledge, on this continuum, basic engineering knowledge is off to the left there, where knowledge is largely adequate. What about medical knowledge? Medical knowledge, if someone says, we need to have your kidney removed, chances are you're not going to just say, sure, sign me up, let's do it tomorrow. You're going to go looking for a second opinion. Why? Because the adequacy of knowledge in medicine is not as great as it is in basic engineering. In medicine, there's a much greater degree of uncertainty where the doctor cannot really know what's going to happen to you once they cut you open. So you're going to go get a second opinion, and so you should. So maybe medicine is under moderate knowledge. If that's true, where's economics on this continuum? You see where I put it. Here be dragons. Economics is at the opposite end of engineering. In economics, the level of ignorance about what we do not know and cannot know is vast. Why? Why? Think about it. The impact of a policy in the future depends on how people act in the future. I'm sorry, the impact of a policy today is how people react to the policy today. That's what's going to determine the impact in the future. But how people react to a policy today depends on what they expect the future to bring. But people can't know what the future is going to bring. So their expectations about the future is going to shape their behavior in the present, but their behavior in the present is going to shape the outcomes in the future. There's a loop there that we can't penetrate. So we don't ever really know. The risks, therefore, of unintended consequences, unforeseeable consequences in economics is much greater than it is in medicine and much greater than it is in engineering. I have some data here on how many people died in Russia, and I'll just give you one little factoid along these lines, because it's just so, the number of people who died is so enormous. Okay, here we go. In Russia, so this, I told you about Jeffrey Sachs earlier and how he went to Poland and Russia and convinced these governments to rush through privatization fast, before the society could respond and slow the process. There's now been a series of reports published in the Lancet Journal, which is one of the leading medical journals in the world, which explores what impact did this transition on Russia have on physical health. And here's what it finds. In Russia, Kazakhstan, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, they suffered a tripling of unemployment and a 41% increase in male death rates between 1991 and 1994. 41% increase in death rates in 3 years. That's the kind of demographic crisis you really only usually see in a war or under the most extreme pandemics. It's not something that happens normally in the course of life. Immediately following the privatization, factoring out other determinants, the researchers conclude that mass privatization programs were associated with an increase in short-term adult male rate mortality, short-term adult male rate mortality rates of 12.8%. Between 1991 and 1994, life expectancy in Russia dropped by as much as 4.7 years overall and 6.2 years for adult males. End quote. That's the end of the research. Extraordinary number of people died because of these economic interventions. Now, is Jeffrey Sachs a bad economist? No, Jeffrey Sachs is a brilliant economist. He's one of the most brilliant economists on the face of the earth. For me, this isn't about him not being a good economist. It's about, it demonstrates just how little we can know about what will be the impact of the policies we advocate in the economy, because economies are just too complex. Here's the image I want you to have when you think about economists. I want you to think about them as having influence in the world, but they don't have control. I think of little Johnny, a 10-year-old kid in a Hummer going down Main Street, you know? A little kid, you know, he's sitting there in a Hummer, he's 10 years old, barreling down Main Street. Is he going to have influence over what's about to happen next? Oh yeah, that kid's going to have a lot of influence about over what's about to happen next. Does he have control over what's going to happen next? You better not bet your life on it or anybody else's life. That's how you should think about economists at the central bank and elsewhere. They have influence without control. They're like little Johnny behind the wheel of a Hummer. Okay, that's it. Here's my last little slide. Here are the 4 premises. Economists have influence by virtue of their intellectual monopoly over the lives of other people. Economists also have institutional power, which amplifies that influence. Point number 3, economic interventions have uneven impact. Policies that help some people harm others. Point number 4, we never can really know in economics what are going to be the impacts of the policies we advocate before we introduce them, which means there's always going to be unintended collateral damage. My argument is this: if you take any one of these points alone, it suffices to make the case that the economics profession had better do a better job than we have up until now in thinking carefully through the ethical challenges of being an economist. What does it mean to be an ethical economist? What would it mean for the economics profession to be an ethical profession? We have not yet asked these questions. And I would suggest to you that our failure to engage these questions itself represents a profound professional ethical failure of the economics profession. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for your patience.